The girl left her friend's house and disappeared without a trace. The police immediately began searching for her, but she seemed to have fallen into the ground. The next day, detectives reviewed surveillance footage, and what awaited them shocked everyone. Carly Brucia was born on March 16, 1992 in the American city of Sarasota, Florida. When the girl was little, her parents divorced, and Carly was left to live with her mother. Her father moved to New York, but despite such a distance, he and his daughter constantly communicated, and the girl flew to him almost every weekend and holiday. Her mother married another man, who became Carly's stepfather. She also had a younger brother, with whom the girl was very close. Carly was very positive, cheerful, and had many friends. On January 31, 2014, when the girl was 11, she stayed overnight with her friend. They had fun, and the next day, Sunday, Carly got ready to go home. In the evening, the American Football Championship final was supposed to be shown on TV, and the girl wanted to watch it with her family. Usually it was her mom or stepdad who dropped her off, but that evening they were both busy. Then Carly decided to walk. It was still light outside, and her house was a little more than a kilometer away. She left her friend's house at about 6:15 p.m., having previously told her friend's parents that her mother allowed her to go alone. When the girl had already left, the woman decided to make sure of this and called her mother, but she said that she did not allow her to walk. Then she decided to ask her husband, Steven, to go and pick up the girl halfway. He got into the car and drove along the road that led to their house, but the girl was nowhere to be found. The stepfather drove around the area several times, but he was never able to find her. Steven told his wife about this, and she began to seriously worry. The road leading from Carly's friend to their house was almost straight, and the girl could hardly have taken any other route. The woman called all her friends who lived in the area. She admitted that Carly could have visited someone else, but no one saw the girl that evening. She and her stepfather waited a little longer, hoping that the girl would still come home. But at about 7:30, my mother decided to call the police. Officers immediately began searching, concentrating efforts along the girl's route. They talked to employees of shops and cafes, knocked on residential buildings, and tried to find at least someone who had seen her. Meanwhile, the police also combed every nook and cranny and inspected the local park, but they were never able to find Carly. The search continued throughout the night. The officers determined that none of the friends and acquaintances had seen the girl that evening, and they were also unable to find a single witness. The police immediately began to look closely at her father as a possible suspect. He had to be on the same street as Carly, and in theory could have kidnapped her. However, the man said that he called his wife almost as soon as he arrived there, and they were in touch the entire time he was driving around looking for the girl. The woman confirmed this, and investigators began to doubt that he could do it. During the conversation with the police, Steven said something interesting. When the man was driving down the street and looking for a girl, he noticed a red pickup truck several times, which was also driving in different directions on this section of the road. Later, when he arrived at the house of his friend Carly, he saw the same car in front of him. It turned out that it belonged to this friend's stepfather named Ron. Detectives began to wonder whether he might have something to do with her disappearance, and they soon had another serious reason for suspicion. The next morning, they brought search dogs to the site. They were allowed to smell Carly's things, and they caught her scent along the road from her friend's house. But then something strange began. The dogs led the detectives to a car wash, which was located almost in the middle of the road. The girl's trail ended at the edge of the parking lot. The police immediately realized that Carly could have walked through the car wash to turn onto a private road and take a shortcut to her home. But the fact that the dogs lost her scent behind the car wash made detectives worry. They unhooked the area and began searching for possible clues. The owner of the car wash said he had motion sensing cameras installed and provided police with footage from the previous day. And here the detectives saw something truly creepy. One of the cameras located behind the car wash filmed Carly walking there at 6:21 p.m. Everything was fine, when suddenly a man came out to meet the girl. He walked up to her and immediately grabbed her hand. Apparently, he spoke to her for several seconds, after which he took her out of view of the camera. These images really shocked investigators. They understood that with a high degree of probability, the camera filmed the moment the girl was abducted. Detectives also suggested that the unknown man may have threatened Carly into going with him. The footage shows him putting his hand in his pocket, possibly threatening her with some kind of weapon if she tried to run away. A main task for the police was to establish the identity of this man. And then they remembered Ron, the stepfather of Carly's friend in the red pickup truck. Despite the poor quality of the camera footage, they came to the conclusion that he looked like the unknown person. Moreover, Steven told them that the pickup truck drove into the territory of a car wash, which gave even more reason for suspicion. Ron was brought in for questioning, but he denied any involvement. The man said that after Carly's mother began to worry, he also decided to go out and search. He and his wife were worried that the girl had left their home without her mother's permission, and they wanted to help with the search. Regarding the camera footage, Ron stated that at 6:21 p.m. he had not yet left work. The police interviewed his colleagues, and they all confirmed that the man actually left after this time. The detectives asked to be allowed to search his van, and Ron agreed. No traces of the girl's presence there could be found, and the police came to the conclusion that the man was telling them the truth. As a result, investigators are back to square one, and they are working hard to identify the man in the video. They immediately noticed his clothes. It looked like a work uniform, and the man had something like a badge or patch on his chest. Experts tried to improve the quality of the recording and try to read what was written there, but they never succeeded. All they could do was guess that the badge had a 3-letter name on it. In addition, tattoos were visible on the man's body, but their pattern also could not be seen due to the poor quality of the recording. Detectives sent the footage to television stations and newspapers, hoping someone would recognize the man. Within a few hours, the recording spread throughout the city, and the police began receiving hundreds of calls. People told them that they knew similar people, and detectives recorded every such tip. The situation was complicated by the fact that the quality of the recording did not allow the suspect's face to be seen. Because of this, many people shared with them their guesses about who it could be, but the vast majority of them were not at all sure about it. This went on for almost a day, until on the morning of February 3, detectives paid attention to one specific call. A man named Dad said he was 100% sure that the person in the footage was his former colleague named Joseph Smith. He recognized him by his gait, build, hairstyle, and clothes. Smith worked as an auto mechanic. The police immediately began making inquiries about this man. Joseph, who was 37 years old, had 3 children, but did not live with them because he was divorced from his wife. The man also had an impressive criminal history. He was arrested more than 10 times on a variety of charges, from illegal substances to kidnapping and holding people against their will. At the moment, Smith was on probation, while a year earlier the man had twice violated the terms of his parole. But for some reason, he was not sent back to prison. The police also found out that Smith owned a brown Lincoln car and decided to review the surveillance footage again. However, they were never able to spot him in the area where the girl was kidnapped. However, they noticed another car that had visited that location several times. The light-colored Buick pulled into the car wash parking lot just 3 minutes before Carly was kidnapped. Unfortunately, due to the quality of the image, investigators were unable to see any important details. Despite the fact that Smith's car was not seen in the area, the police still decided to check it. The men rented a room in the house of an elderly couple, and detectives headed towards them. First, they observed the house and found out that the owner was not there, and Smith himself was in his room. However, when they knocked on the door, no one answered. The police called the officer who was responsible for Joseph's early release and began to wait. About 45 minutes later, Smith's sister arrived at the house and brought her brother to detectives. The man said that he had nothing to do with this kidnapping and that he was far from the area that day. When he was shown the CCTV footage, Smith admitted that the man in the photo did look like him, but it wasn't him. The men also allowed the investigator to search his room and car without a warrant. In the room, they found several sets of gray mechanics work uniforms, similar to what the kidnapper was wearing. The patch also featured his shortened three-letter name, Joe. As we remember, experts were able to establish that the kidnapper also had a three-letter name written on his chest. However, not a single significant piece of evidence was found in the room. While the police were searching the home, the owner of the house returned. She said the man was indeed home at about 6:30 p.m. as he had used the house phone to speak to his ex-wife. Thus, Joseph had a reliable alibi. However, during a search of his car, police found 2 spoons, which apparently were used to heat illegal substances. Given that this was a parole violation, Smith was arrested and taken to the station. After this, detectives began to consider other possible suspects, but later that evening something unexpected happened. The husband of the owner of the house in which Joseph rented a room arrived at the police station. The man said his wife had some memory problems and accidentally gave false information to police. In fact, on the day of the abduction, Smith left home at approximately 3 p.m. and returned at 7 a.m. the next day. It is noteworthy that at that moment he was wearing a mechanic's work uniform. It turned out that Joseph not only did not have an alibi for the time of the abduction, but he also lied to the police that he was at home. However, this was not the most interesting thing. Before leaving the house, Smith borrowed his car from the owner of the house, a light-colored Buick, the same one that had driven into the car wash parking lot 3 minutes before the abduction. The owner of the house added that when Joseph returned the car to him, there was a real mess inside. The man moved the seat back, rearranged things, and did not explain why he did all this. Given all this, Joseph immediately became the main suspect, and the police brought him in for questioning. However, the man refused to talk without his lawyer, and investigators sent him back to prison, where he was being held for violating parole. The next day his brother, John, came to the police station. And here's something interesting awaited the detective. The man said that in recent years he and his brother had practically no contact. But on the evening of February 1, Joseph called him. The man refused to talk to him, but a few hours later he arrived at his house. Apparently, Joseph was under the influence of some strong substances, and his brother kicked him out. Later, he saw footage of the kidnapping on the news and immediately realized that it was his brother. The detectives asked John to help them get a confession, and the man agreed. He visited him in prison with his mother, and the brothers talked for about an hour and a half. However, when John came out, he said that Joseph never admitted to anything. He continued to insist that he had nothing to do with this crime. Detectives suspected that the brother and his mother might be hiding something from them. John said he recognized his brother in the news video, but he did not share this information with police until several days later. As a result, investigators decided to follow him, and soon it bore fruit. Apparently, John noticed the surveillance and thought that the detectives were also tapping his phone. They didn't actually do that, but he didn't know that. As a result, the very next evening he called the police himself and said that in fact his brother confessed to him and his mother about the kidnapping. Joseph said that he was not sure whether he killed the girl, but this option was already the most obvious. The brother managed to convince him to tell where he left Carly, and Joseph said that he left her near the local church. John and his mother went there, but they were never able to find anything. They hoped to the last that their relative was not actually involved, so they decided to first verify everything for themselves before telling the investigators. The police immediately went to this church, and in the trees not far from it, they found Carly's body. She was partially missing clothing, and it was obvious that the victim had been dead for several days. Meanwhile, the detectives heard from John everything that his brother told him in prison. According to the suspect, that day he took illegal substances, and then everything was a blur. He admitted that he kidnapped the girl, abused her in the car, and then allegedly strangled her. Medical experts confirmed that the victim actually died from strangulation. Meanwhile, forensic scientists were studying evidence in the Buick that Joseph borrowed from the owner of the house and found several hairs of Carly, as well as 7 pieces of fabric that matched the material of the t-shirt the girl was wearing that evening. In addition, traces of semen were found on this t-shirt. DNA analysis showed that it belonged to Joseph Smith. All this was enough to accuse him of murder. However, despite confessing to his brother and mother, the man again declared his innocence, and the case went to trial. The trial began in September 2005, almost 2 years after the murder. The defense was unable to provide any evidence in favor of their client's innocence, but the prosecution had plenty of evidence. The CCTV footage, the false alibi, the DNA on the victim's body, and the fact that he gave her location clearly indicated his guilt. The trial went fairly quickly, and Joseph Smith was found guilty. On March 15, 2006, he was sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping and abuse, and the man received a death sentence for the murder of Carly. Since then, Joseph Smith has been in prison awaiting execution. However, 13 years later, in July 2017, this sentence was overturned. The reason for this was a new law, according to which a unanimous decision of the jury is required to impose a death sentence. In Joseph's case, 10 out of 12 people voted for such a sentence. The man remained in prison to serve his life sentence. But in April 2020, the court reviewed the reversal of his sentence and returned the death penalty. But Joseph never saw the execution of this sentence. On July 26, 2021, he died in prison at the age of 55. Despite his death in the Joseph Smith case, questions still remain. After his imprisonment, detectives began to think that he might be involved in other murders. Studying this issue, they came to the conclusion that he most likely killed a young girl in 2000, whose case was still unsolved. Even his brother said that he also suspected Joseph of this crime. Perhaps the police will someday be able to find this evidence that will link him to this murder, but for now it remains unsolved.